Good afternoon, everyone. So I was asked to reflect a bit on the DRS symposium that happened last fall. And so I locked myself in my office and I reflected. And here are the three things that came to mind when I was doing that. I think there are three things that I hope will help to frame the discussion moving forward. The first is, I think, a broader understanding of the sort of the genesis and the evolution of DRS will help us as we move forward. I think remembering back to the symposium, we had Wade Horn on a panel who was with the administration during the reauthorization of Head Start. We had Ruth Friedman on the panel, who was pretty much the author of the Head Start Act, working for Congressman Miller at the time. And so they gave really interesting perspectives about sort of DRS at the time, but I think what will help a little bit is just to talk a little bit more about sort of the evolution, from the beginning of the Bush administration to now. And I'm going to try to take you through that. The second is, at the heart of DRS is a measurement issue. I think we're trying to identify and measure low-performing programs versus higher-performing programs. And so I want to talk a little bit about applying a psychometric perspective to DRS. There's an entire field of study dedicated to measuring things, and I don't know if we're using it in this conversation, so I want to sort of maybe drive some of the conversation that way. And the third thing is, wondering, just a sort of a wondering whether or not we can sort of come together as a field as we move forward to figure out how we're gonna revise the system as we head into the next phase of or the next reauthorization of Head Start. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the history. So one of my colleagues is the daughter of an early childhood educator. Her mom's an early childhood educator, and her father is an artist. So what happens is you get really good graphics about early childhood. So this is sort of what I put together to talk a little bit about the history. I started at the beginning of the Bush administration, and so how many people have been in Head Start since 2000? Okay, great. So you can help me with this history, because this is the history according to Jeff and sort of my perspective on what happened. So I'll start sort of with the Bush administration and kind of go through where we are today. And I think one of the things you noticed when Bush became president back in 2001 is you had a change in the narrative around Head Start. There was a lot more conversation about Head Start as an expensive program. How do we know what we're getting for children? Is it worth the money? Are we getting the most bang for our buck around Head Start? And so you see, sort of as the Bush administration goes forward, you see the national reporting system start in 2003. This massive, data collection on children. They were telling us that, this is not for accountability purposes. This is just to learn more about Head Start is doing. I don't know if any of us really bought that, but ultimately, it went away with the 2007 Act. But that's sort of where the accountability discussion really started around Head Start, I think, in 2003. And then in 2005, I was talking earlier, this is the year we kind of want to forget in the Head Start community, right? Because we had that first pass at Head Start reauthorization where they were talking about the state pilots. And then you also had the first year findings of the Head Start impact study, and then you had the GAO reports coming out. And so let me just talk a little bit more about that. So taking you back to sort of ancient history back in 2005, where you have the Head Start impact study findings for the first year. So this is for the 4-year-olds right after they get out of Head Start. And just what I did is I took the findings from the executive summary, and essentially the way that the report presents the data on Head Start is in terms of effect sizes. And so when you look at the literature around effect sizes, a 0.8 is usually considered a really big effect size, a 0.5 is considered a moderate effect size, and a 0.3 is considered low. And so what I did is I just took most of the outcomes from the report, and where you don't see a bar is where there was no statistically significant difference, according to the report, between the kids that were randomly assigned to Head Start and those kids that were randomly assigned to the control group. And there was a lot of conversation about these findings, if you remember. So are these good? Is Head Start doing a good job? Or Head Start not doing a good job? So, those of us who thought Head Start was doing a good job, it's like, Head Start outcomes are really hard to move for the at-risk population that we serve. And so the fact that we're getting statistically significant effects of low to moderate size is a good thing. And you've got like Cyril Yasukawa putting these findings in context for us from Harvard. And so just that kind of started the debate. So that's part of the context around DRS was, the conservatives were thinking that this was not good enough. And then you have the GAO report that came out in 2005 that talked a lot about fiscal issues with Head Start programs and how hard it was for the Office of Head Start to defund programs. And so I just pulled sort of one of the quotes from the report. It's like, while ACF has the authority to terminate a grantee, this process is rarely used. ACF most often works to encourage grantees to voluntarily relinquish their grants. Senior Head Start officials in the 2 ACF regional offices we visited told us that they are reluctant to pursue termination because the processes used to collect information to support such an action are inadequate, and the termination procedures are a drain on staff resources. As a result, the process to remove a grantee that consistently fails to perform up to standards is protracted, and that grantee can continue to receive funds long after financial management weaknesses have been identified. So this is something that Congress is leading. So you've got sort of these lackluster findings around the Head Start Impact Study. You've got the GAO report coming out that's saying, okay, it's really hard to move these grantees, to get them defunded. And again, setting the context for what happens in 2007.
Jack, can you be a little bit louder?
I sure can. I'll give it my best shot. I might. I'm actually hiding from this table behind the podium. So you've got everything that happened in 2005, right? So that's setting the context for the reauthorization that actually does happen in 2007. Sorry. Maybe if I step out here, that might help. And essentially, everybody knows that the DRS was reauthorized, was part of the 2007 reauthorization, right? And it talks about, a designation renewal system that integrates the recommendations for an expert panel. So one of the pieces that I think we forget about in the history of the DRS is that the 2007 Act called for DRS, but they just didn't, they also called for this expert panel to say, okay, what would be the best way to implement this? Right? So when the administration was thinking about implementation, they had to go back to the law and they had to go back to the expert panel in order to come up with the actual conditions. And if you look at the expert panel, okay, before I do that, so one of the things about the 2007 Act is like it specifically references that 2005 GAO study in the report. So this is from Senator Kennedy at the time. His committee talks about the committee was very concerned with some findings of the GAO February 28, 2005 report entitled Head Start Comprehensive Approach to Identifying and Addressing Risk, blah, blah, blah. This report determined that 53% of grantees identified with noncompliance were again cited for noncompliance in their next review. So it's not only the Republicans that were concerned about this, it was Senator Kennedy and the Democrats on the committee that were also saying, okay, we're not doing enough to make sure that Head Start programs are performing well because we're seeing the same issues come up time after time. So again, more context. Okay, so then you have the reauthorization. And then you have the expert panel issuing its findings around what they think would be an effective designation renewal system. They talk about reliable and valid, transparent to families, programs in the public. Again, there's an underlying theme of measurement here. So reliable and valid are psychometric terms, right? So we want to talk about that as we move forward. It's got to be simple and easily understood by stakeholders, integrated into ongoing systems for program improvements. You have to use multiple sources of data, not just one, and they list the sources of data. And then the other piece they talked about is you want to have automatic indicators, so where you're cast into competition right away based on something that's particularly egregious. And you also want to have indicators that talk about, that sort of capture patterns of poor performance. And they go on and on. DRS should have a clear threshold. Not that everybody takes it before very seriously. So they have a clear threshold to determine which grantees must compete. The DRS should incorporate a valid, reliable, and practical classroom observation tool and effective measures of child outcomes and individualization when OHS is satisfied that it has sound measures. So that's when they review the class instrument, and that's when the class ended up becoming part of the designation renewal system. It has to be implemented in a manner that gives no advantage to any particular program, and then it should be reevaluated after the cycles. And I think this is what we're doing now. This is our reevaluation of the program. And so what HHS did is it issued a response to the report, essentially agreeing with all of the recommendations. Okay, so now the report is issued. President Bush leaves office, President Obama comes in. There's a little bit of a lag with the transition between the two administrations. And then you have, in 2010, you have the second round of the Head Start Impact Study coming out, which is looking at the outcomes and whether or not they're sustained through kindergarten. And so if you look at, remember these are the Head Start Impact Studies for the 4-year-olds right after the kids left Head Start. They follow those children through kindergarten, and these were the effects after kindergarten. You guys remember this? Mm-hmm. So this was not a good day in the administration, right? And so what ended up happening is, the administration issued the Head Start Roadmap to Excellence, talked about, okay, we're going to increase expectations on programs, we're going to put out a new child development and early learning framework, we're going to put out the parent, family, and community engagement framework around for family engagement. We're going to provide Head Start programs more support. We're going to revise the TNTA system. They created the national centers. And then we're going to strengthen Head Start's accountability provisions, and we're going to implement what the law told us to do in 2007. We're going to do the DRS, which is it's important. Like the Head Start Impact Study did not cause the DRS to happen. It's just part of the context for the implementation of the DRS. Okay, then we keep moving forward. Sorry. So we've got the notice of proposed rulemaking happening in September of 2010. The final rule in November, and then the first cohort starts in December, and we've been going through the cohorts since. What we're looking at next sort of the big milestone is the evaluation of the DRS that will be coming out from OPRE, the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation, which they say will hopefully be out in the spring. So we'll learn more about how DRS is doing as a result of that, and then we move into sort of the next phase, which is the authorization. Okay. History according to Jeff. Okay. All right. So why talk about the history? I think one of the things that's important is like you want to understand that DRS didn't just happen. It was a deliberative process. It involved many players. It involved sort of what the intent of the law was and the congressional reauthorization. It involved the national experts through the expert panel, and it also involved the administration interpreting everything. So I think it also gives you a better understanding of the rationale behind the triggers and the structures of DRS. And it's really, if you look back at, when you're in the moment, like, we're all child advocates here, right? We're all Head Start advocates. And when you look back at the moments, during this history, they're trying to take us down. They're trying to defund Head Start. But if you look back at what Congressman Boehner was saying at the time, what Senator Kennedy was saying, I actually should have done this. I could have put up a quote from Congressman Boehner and Senator Kennedy, and you would not have known who was saying it, because they're like, we're very strongly in support of Head Start. This is really about just identifying those programs that aren't performing well and trying to get better programs to help young children. So it's not an effort to take down the program, but to identify a relatively small percentage of low performers. And it also, I think, just provides some context when we talk about sort of, you have to know your history before you start talking about it. Okay, so that was takeaway 1. So only 3 hours left to go. All right, my second point. Okay, so number 2 is around the psychometric perspective and this issue of measurement. And I just, when you think about what the psychometric perspective is, it's just really, it's dedicated to understanding how best to measure variables. And when you think about the DRS, are you accurately measuring those aspects of program quality that matter most? So there are really two dimensions to what we need to figure out. What do we need to measure, and what's most important? How do you do the best job measuring those things, right? And so when you think about sort of moving forward, we want to think about that. And this really does provide a frame by which hopefully everyone can agree, sort of a common table for everyone to think about realization. And so when you think about sort of some of the current conditions from a psychometric perspective, for example, the deficiency, one of the things that a psychometrician might say about the deficiency trigger is that you have a problem with construct validity, because are you measuring what you intend to measure? You've got potentially 1,000 different ways that you can get caught up in this condition, right? The deficiency is not one thing. You might have a serious health and safety concern in the program will get you into a deficiency. You might have a sprinkler head that's too high off the ground in the back, and you get cited for it, non-compliance. You don't fix it, or there's some paperwork issue. And so there are 100 different or 1,000 different ways to get in, not all of them equal. And I think this is sort of part of what NHSA is saying about the issue with deficiency, right? And they talk about, you really want to look at the severity, you want to look at the systematic nature or the systemic nature of it, and not just look at deficiency, no deficiency. And hopefully we're going to start moving in that direction. The other is this trigger or condition around school readiness goals. Programs are supposed to set school readiness goals, monitor progress towards those goals, and do a quality improvement process based on what they're seeing in their aggregate child assessment data. And one of the things looking at Emily's report was no Head Start programs are getting into competition through this trigger. And so when you think about the burden of measuring this, and it yields essentially no impact. So if it has no value to the measurement of DRS essentially. And so when I used to work at the Urban Institute, and we used to have to design surveys. And what we tried to do is you have to keep the survey length relatively short, or people aren't going to want to respond. So every question has to have a dramatic impact on what you're trying to measure, or you take it out. And so the question with the school readiness goals, if it's not catching anyone in the competition, why do you have it in? So either you make it more meaningful, or you take it out. And part of it is I think we need more guidance around what that trigger should be. And if you look at the Advisory Committee on Head Start Research, their first recommendation is around, with school readiness and other key outcomes as beacons, strengthen Head Start as a learning organization that is characterized by a commitment to using data for continuous improvement to further strengthen outcomes. So it seems like you don't want to take this one out necessarily because it is so important to a continuous quality improvement process. We just need to make it something that actually makes a difference. So that was another reflection. And then with regard to class, I think it's interesting because class has very strong construct and predictive validity. There's a lot of research that talks about it is measuring what it's intended to measure, and when children are in those classrooms with high class scores, you see stronger school readiness outcomes. So the issue is you have this 10% threshold with class, right? And one of the issues is, from a reliability perspective, is you can have two programs with the same score in different cohorts, one of them getting into competition and one of them not getting into competition based on where the threshold is during that cohort. And so in terms of uniformity across the programs, does everybody understand that? That's pretty forward. So in terms of, because you guys are looking at me, you getting this? How about you guys hiding behind me? So anyway, so this is an issue with uniformity. So it's something that we want to look at a little bit more closely. And I think the other piece of this is, I talked a little bit about, you want to have good construct validity, you want to be measuring what you intend to measure, but you also have to measure it well. So the implementation of the class is a really big issue. And we want to make sure that we're implementing the class well as we go forward. Okay, just really quickly on takeaway 3 is around what the field should be doing, moving forward. I think, Ruth Friedman said something, and I can't remember how she said it, but she's like, the DRS isn't going anywhere, and I think that's true. And I think the question is, we shouldn't be attacking it so much as we need to figure out how to make it better. And I think, we need to come together as a community and figure out what is it we want exactly, and put it forth in one voice. And we want to build off the lessons learned of the past cohorts, and perhaps recommend another expert panel. It's like, what would people who are experts in measurement do, so that it's sort of a fair process for all. So those were my reflections, and I will yield to my panel colleagues.
We're thrilled to have you.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here. So DRS was the party I got the invitation to that I really didn't want to go to. But then after we got in it, we realized it really was a party. So let me back up and tell you just a little bit about our program. We're a community action program. We had been funded since Head Start was created. And so by year 46, I think it was, we're fairly entrenched in our service delivery approach. I didn't actually come to be program director until 2009. In 2007, as a non-traditional student for the third time in my life, I was finishing up my graduate degree, and I had a research and evaluation class, program evaluation class. And the professor, who, first of all, I don't like math and I don't like statistics, so I already had a big chip on my shoulder in this class. And then she wouldn't give me special recognition or accommodation because I was commuting so far into school. So that was a chip on the other shoulder. I had worked for a short time as a family community services manager in a program, and so I knew what Head Start did, and I knew the way that Head Start changed lives. So when I walked into the program on the third class day, and she said, so about program evaluation, programs are going to start disappearing because now we really know about outcomes and we really know what needs to happen in these programs. We can quantify that. So she starts naming off programs that are going to disappear in the next 10 years, and I wasn't really paying attention because that meant nothing to me. I just need to get an A in this class and move on with my life. And then she said, and Head Start's going to disappear too because they absolutely cannot quantify anything that they do that have no outcomes. So their free ride is over. And that just went all over me. Well, I could do nothing about it. I needed an A in the class. In case I didn't catch my flight from Tulsa to Dallas and then get my rent-a-car and didn't get in a wreck on the freeway and get to class every week, I needed some special accommodation from her. So I just kept my mouth shut. But those vows you make to yourself, I thought, I don't think that's right. That cannot be right. So fast forward to 2009 when the 20-plus year veteran program director retires and I'm hired to take her job. And on my first day, I come in with all these bright ideas and I met with, that's not how we do it here. We've always done it this way. So I started trying to create change in this organization. I got all the right books. I applied all the right management techniques. And at the end of it, it was always, well, that's not how we do it here. We've always done it this way. I was really between a rock and a hard place, but I'm pretty stubborn, so I just kept hammering it away. And we had our review in 2011. And the prophetic words that the former program director spoke came to pass. She said, I'm out of here. I don't have time for all these changes. You're welcome to this. We gave her a nice party. We named a center in her honor, and she has never darkened our door again. She really meant it. So we have our review, and I'm pretty sure that I'm reading signals from the governance piece that we're not doing what we're supposed to be doing, but I'm part of a community action program, so my authority to change things past a certain level was a little bit hampered. And so, sure enough, our executive director had also retired at that time, so we had a new executive director, I was a new program director, and then we have the Head Start review. So we did not get our results from our review until over a year later, and we were so mad and flailing around and, just, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? And our program specialist kept saying, you're going to have to recompete. I know you are, and recompetition was a new word, and nobody could understand it, and we thought that was the worst thing in the world that could possibly happen. And then when it came, it was so good for us that they had waited because we had the opportunity to compete for 0 to 5 as opposed to early Head Start and Head Start. So that was a gift. I also made some friends with people in the Head Start community who were really positive about change. And one of them said to me one day as I was flailing around, as I really want to do, I'm on my best behavior today, but making noise is kind of my thing. They said to me, well, just, don't waste a crisis. I thought, that's pretty clever. So then as we began to move forward in the grant writing process, which, our whole process started in 2011 and did not end until mid-year 2014. So it was a long process. About, just a few months into this, I realized this is the opportunity to make all the changes I want to make and blame it on DRS. All these things that I've wanted to do, that everybody had their heels dug in because that's not how we do it, guess what? There is no how we do it. We got in trouble for doing it how we do it. We have to do it a different way. So we began this change process. And, the nice way to say it is never waste a crisis, but in my office, our motto became change or die. Because we were not going to continue to exist if we did not change. So life as we knew it was going to be completely over, but we had an option to make these changes and really not only survive, but thrive, and I'm all about that as a social worker. You just don't want perpetual victims, you want people who overcome. So this just became our guiding, this is our movement forward. Now my husband and I are sailors, we have a sailboat, and I don't recommend it for marriages that are in trouble because if he gets to be the captain, he has to be the second mate, that's already a problem, and I like to be the boss. We bought a sailboat when our daughters left for college because we really wondered if we could stay married after having raised kids for 30 plus years. So this was the way we chose to bond. In sailing, we took lessons, and part of lessons are they try to knock you overboard with the mast so they know how you're going to react. It's pretty brutal. And so, but part of sailing is when you're dead in the water. You say dead in the water a lot, right? What dead in the water really means is that you have lost any momentum in your sailboat because of your sails. And you also may not know this, I did until I took these lessons, that you sail faster against the wind than with the wind. And when you are dead in the water, you have to figure out which way the wind is blowing and readjust your sails. Because only cowards power up their little puny motor and, you can't do anything with the motor on the sailboat. That's for emergencies only. So literally, we found ourselves dead in the water, and we had to change, and we were able to gauge which way the wind was blowing, and we readjusted our sails, and we moved forward with the absolute renovation of our program. We also, in our community action agency, had an abuse treatment facility for children ages 3 to 5 that was because of some different changes in Medicaid. Our Medicaid provider had to pull out, and so we were faced with a $250,000 deficit. Because of that we had to fundraise from the community, and there are a lot of community donations that go into that facility, but this was over and above that. And so this was a wonderful opportunity to save that program, bring it into Head Start, redevise everything, and I had just come up with a brilliant idea just a short time before that of Director of Children's Services. So it was very easy to bring all of that in, incorporate into Head Start, breathe new life into that. We were able to satisfy a mission that the program had had for years, to be viable and sustainable. It was really a gift. And because of that gift, now we have a really viable, strong, beautiful program that it would have taken me generations to change. It would have been 2 or 3 people sitting in the chair I sit in to make that change. Now, it was not all rosy every day. DRS is, a process, not an event. It's not quick and you're done. It's a long process. And we were very early in that process, so it was a little bit bloody. And there was a lot of things that I think, moving forward, we should change, because I think the stigma of it was the worst thing. After all was said and done, it's the stigma of you're in DRS, and then predatory programs who are much lower quality than you but don't tell the truth. They wind up competing for your grant, and you're just in this defensive mode. So I will tell you right now, because our program, we hire humans. Humans make mistakes. We have policies and procedures, and if you follow those, you'll stay out of trouble. But if you don't, you'll be in trouble, and so are our program. We're still hiring people every day. So I already have my plan. You're going to DRS again? I already know what the next 5 years needs to look like for our program, because I want to be proactive. I'm not going to be afraid of it. I'm not going to run from it, and I refuse to be stigmatized about it. This is where we live now. This is what happens now. Let's just move forward with it. Let's make the changes. Never waste a crisis. Never let a lesson be lost, but let's move forward. So I want to have some notes here. So just to give you an idea of the class component, and class was, we were early on, so class was not figured into our recompetition. Ours was governance. We had governance issues. And I will say we have one of the most active boards our community action program has ever had, and they love it, and they are invested, and they are engaged to the point that we hardly know what to do with them because they're just in everything all the time. But that's how it should be, because it has brought us to a place of extreme accountability and also extreme viability and visibility in the community. So just to tell you about class, we have seen in emotional support a 19% increase since DRS. So we measured before, and these are our percentages now, and my timer is done. In classroom organization, we've had a 33% increase, and in instructional support, we've had a 41% increase. And I credit this to, first of all, we were able to change. And when I say we made drastic changes, you know, people went to be successful somewhere else. We have a much higher quality and a higher educated staff now. So there is a lot more meaningful and intentional interactions and applications. And ask anybody in our organization that was with us in 2012 and that's with us today, and they will tell you that the turning point for Head Start, what really made Head Start viable, was recompetition. Sorry, that's our story. That's what happened with us. But I credit a lot of it to those early words of someone outside of my circle at that time saying to me, "Don't waste a crisis." It's all in how we perceive it. It's either a tragedy or it's an opportunity. And I'd like to choose opportunity. So thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And for those who don't know, we're going to start a Run for Elected Office campaign after that very, very motivational overview of what you all have done and how far you've come. And there are lots of lessons to learn from that. And we commend you for your leadership in that. We also wanted to bring Yvette in and hear her commentary. With Yvette having sat in so many different seats, having been in serving our children in different roles.
So I'm gonna keep my remarks short because you guys also know that I also love the interaction. So I know there's gonna be time for some dialogue and some questions. But I just wanted to start by saying, so we're going into our next big opportunity for Head Start, right? We're on the verge of a potential reauthorization. It could happen in the next year. It could happen in 2 years. But we're on the verge of it. And I just want to share something that somebody said to me once, who's been in Head Start for a long time, that in this country, as it relates to early childhood, where Head Start goes, so does the rest of the country. So when we're thinking about what we do in Head Start every day, keep in mind that that has a domino effect on the rest of the field. And I'll just give you some examples, right? Head Start has been talking about parents forever, right? Since the beginning. But then we started talking about family engagement, and states started talking about family engagement. We started talking about the importance of serving infants and toddlers, and everybody started talking about infants and toddlers. And the research on infants and toddlers picked up after the implementation of early Head Start in the early 90s. And now we're like all about the brain science, right? Because we learned so much. We started talking about traumatic events and how that affects kids in Head Start, doing some pilots, and now we're all about trauma, right? Trauma-informed care. So keep that in mind as you go back to your programs and you implement Head Start. What you do, others will follow. And so I say that because as we're about to embark on this next great opportunity, it's not only a time for us to think about how we impact Head Start, but it's a time for us to think about what we do in Head Start reauthorization impacts the rest of the field. Because that's still true today. Whether people say the program is bad, whether it's going to go away, whether it's going to get block granted, whatever rumors you hear, the next Head Start reauthorization is the opportunity to think about where we go with early childhood in this country. So we're not just talking about the million kids that we serve. We're talking about the other million kids who we don't serve, who are still in need of our services. So I want you to keep that in mind. That is a huge thing for me as we move forward. And so with that, I would say that it's important to understand the history of what has happened, where we've come to, and why we do it. And so I would really urge folks to start to think about what are the different roles and responsibilities that everybody has, right? So when we were implementing DRS, when I was at the Office of Head Start, it became really clear to me that, it's not common knowledge on how this stuff happens, right? So a lot of people would come up to me and think that I was doing it, like me, right? I'm the one who was deciding like what the 7 triggers were. That's not the case, trust me. But it's really interesting, right? So I was just the face of it, right? I'm the head. I got to defend it, which I did, and I still do today. But I think it's really important to understand how these things happen. So what role does Congress play, right? So Congress said, you're going to do competition. Like Congress said it, so it's going to happen. The role of the government was to figure out how to do that. And then what is the role of grantees? Your biggest role is to advocate, right? Advocate for what is it that needs to change and how do we move forward. But the truth is that as we went into that, we were so far from the reauthorization of 2007 that those pieces sort of got lost. So as we move into our next reauthorization, my challenge to you all, which I think Jeff framed beautifully, is to think about what are the things that we can measure, right? Everything about our existing systems, monitoring, TA, all school readiness goals, it's all very subjective. You know it, I know it, everybody knows it. The government does its best to figure out how to make it a little bit more objective, but that's a really hard thing because we're dealing in a business with humans, right? So I would highly urge you all to think about what are the things that we can measure. Who are the people that we need to bring to the table to help us figure out what can we measure, right? And some of that means that we got to think about what does the monitoring system look like. The feds did a little bit of work on that too, right? Figuring out what was valid and reliable. There was some good data that came out of there, but it's still really a subjective system, right? People would agree? Yes? No? Yes. Okay, say that. So I would really urge folks to start to think about what are the things that you can measure. I'll give you one quick example. There has been a discussion, probably for the last decade, around child outcomes. Everybody remembers the National Reporting System, right? Yes. Maybe not. I don't know. People look really young in this room. Like, I'm sitting over here, and there's like people over here who are like, we're really young. And I'm like, well, maybe they don't remember, but everybody knows, right? National Reporting System. Okay, it was the first time, I know, we're not crazy about it, right? But it was the first time that we actually had real data about what kids knew. Okay, that hasn't happened again in a long time. I get it. Programs collect that information in their programs on a regular basis. But let's be honest, guys, we could use a little bit of help on that too, right? So we need to, that's just one example, child outcomes. What does it mean? What does it look like? What are the things that we think kids should know as they transition into public schools? What are those things? I definitely have some ideas. I'm sure you have some ideas, right? The trick here is coming to a compromise about what those things are and how do we measure them and what's the standard. So think about those things. The other thing I would say is think about the roles, right? What's everybody's role? As I was listening to Jeff talk a little bit about school readiness, we talk a lot about sort of the monitoring has to happen, you're going to collect information, they're going to figure this out. I think it's really important to figure out what is it exactly that the federal government can control. So then you can figure out who do you really have to lobby, right? Who are the people that you should be pushing on? Sometimes, I gotta be honest with you, it's not the feds, right? So think about this, the role of the federal government is to implement what Congress said they had to do. So think about who's responsible for implementing that. Whose that bright idea was that? So you really have to think about those pieces. And then I think about the role of grantees. Besides implementing programs, you're the next big voice, right? You are the people that legislators listen to. When you go to the Hill, they listen. So it would be my suggestion that folks really start to sing from the same songbook, right? What do you want measured? How do you want it measured? Who should measure it? I don't know. Think about all of those things. And I'll just end by saying that I think people have come a long way. You know, I will admit that competition, the implementation of the designation renewal system, it was a hard thing, and it wasn't just a hard thing for grantees. It was a hard thing for anybody who had to figure out how to do it. But what I want to end by saying is that know that everybody who does these things comes with the intent of serving kids and families. And I want you to know that even though I'm not at the Office of Head Start anymore, people who work there, and I've been in a lot of federal bureaucracies, you guys, people who work there actually believe that these programs can raise families out of poverty. So that's your challenge, right? Is figuring out how do we do that in a way that is measurable so that we can tell our story in a better way. So I'm going to end there, and I really am looking forward to the conversation. And I want to thank Teachstone for inviting me.
Well, thank you, Yvette. You've all heard your call to action. And, you know, thinking about measurement and thinking about how we can all pull that rope in the same direction together. We all have the same goals. Sometimes we have different ideas of how to get to those goals, but working together to get to that end is a really important thing. And that's why we wanted to provide this opportunity for us to come together and be a part of this feedback loop. And so I keep referring to this feedback loop, and I think of it as our feedback loop for the DRS system. And so we're thinking through from the history and the experiences and our call to action, what we need to do in order to better serve children. Really, that's the center of our goal. And the mechanism for doing that in the context of today is really talking about measurement. But I also want to remind ourselves that measurement is a means to an end, but the end is really serving children. And what a lot of folks don't know is that when Bob and Bridget developed the class, they didn't set out to develop a measurement tool. What they did was they wanted to go into classrooms and see what about a teacher and a child, or a teacher and group of children, made more effective classroom settings, and why some children were faring very well after a year in this really interesting, intriguing environment, and other children were not thriving. And so from that perspective, they started observing and they started measuring, and they found out they could categorize effective teaching practices in these interactions and create indicators out of them. They took those indicators and they created the class. And so there's this great success in them going in, being in the classroom and creating a measurement tool that we could use, right? That really wasn't the point either. What they wanted to do is they were so frustrated over the fact that some children were just lucking into a great environment, a great learning environment. And some children were just getting the bad end of that deal and having a year of wasted time, or even less good experiences with that teacher. And so they said, what if we could change that chance of luck, or the chance, the coin toss, to a guarantee? Change luck into a guarantee. How can we work with teachers to make sure that what goes on in classrooms is consistently effective so every child gets, frankly, what they deserve? And so they developed My Teaching Partner. And My Teaching Partner is a high-intensity coaching model that works on these feedback loops so teachers are respectfully engaged in improving how they interact with children. And we find remarkable differences through these types of interventions. And that's really the heart of what we do at Teachstone and what drove and continues to drive Bob and Bridget in their research and in their work, and really all of us at Teachstone to make sure that we switch luck into guarantees. Thank you, NHSA, for starting the conversation and letting us to continue this on. We are thrilled that you all are here to think through how we can provide feedback in this loop, and we can all be pulling that rope together in the same direction. So if anyone has comments, we'd love, or questions for anyone or for the group.
I have a question. So as this DRS is being assessed, what are there benchmarks, and is there a timeline, and where will it go, and when will it be implemented?
You mean what Jeff talked about, the ACF study?
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know as much about it as I should, but essentially a couple of things that they're working on is they're trying to understand, are the right programs actually getting into the system? Are the right ones not? And then also there's a special piece on looking at the class and making sure that the implementation of the class, given the way it's implemented through the DRS, provides similar accurate information as if it were done sort of outside of the DRS system with more cycles.
I'm just wondering where you think, where can we go with that? How can we get rid of the stigma in this process?
I think part of it was the goal. Like, if we sort of think back to history, right? So if we're thinking about the historical context, part of it was the rollout and the messaging, right? So initially, I think Jeff put some of the messaging out. To be quite honest, words matter, right? And I think in the initial sort of rollout and messaging, there was just this really, there was a lot of pressure to make sure that there was a strong message being sent about accountability. But in that messaging, I will say, I think we lost track of that, thinking about how this was going to play out, right? Which, to be quite honest again, like, that's what happened. I think the messaging has changed over time, and I think it's really due to a lot of the work that grantees have done, to the work that NHSA has done, and now I think as it's becoming just part of our process, right? This is just part of every year, there's going to be competition. It's becoming part of our process, but, I would look to grantees, like, at the local level, it's a tough thing, and I don't know how to explain that at the local level.
Yeah, and I just want to add, to build on Karen's point, something that we're all going to have to think about as a community in the next few years. Now that we have, this past week, grantees who, even though they're in year 2 or year 3 of their 5-year grant, they have a class score in the lowest 10% for their year. They're notified you'll compete 2.5 years from now. What does that mean for our programs, getting leases, or partnerships, building relationships, when not only do you have the stigma, but you have this incredibly long period out of your grant life that you have to live with that uncertainty. And I don't think that we have an answer for that yet, but especially...
I think there are two things there. I think one is the long path is also a long opportunity, right? So, I think in some ways I'd like to know 20 months ahead of time versus 6 months ahead of time, an area where I need to start working toward program improvement. And the other piece is really, what are we doing within our community and outside, and when I say in our community, the early childhood community, not only in the Head Start, to really help people understand what recompetition means. And I think that's your point, is it's continuous quality improvement, right? And so how do we act as change agents in that perception? How do we communicate? How do we support each other? Or are we contributing to the other DRS?
So guys, I would just though add though that I think that goes back to the piece about understanding how these things work, right? So I get that some grantees have gotten their letters and they've got 3 years until they can be recompeted. But that's because that's how the law is set up. When you are in a 5-year, whatever you're granted is, if it's 1 year, if it's 2 years, if it's 3 years, if it's 4 years, if it's 10 years, the federal government cannot revoke your grant unless it is for some, serious, some kid has died or money has seriously been embezzled. I mean, that is the law, right? And so that I think goes to part of understanding how some of these things are playing themselves out. There are rules in place. Sometimes the feds have to follow those. I'll also though keep in mind that for a while grantees were complaining that they weren't getting enough notice. So we sort of need to figure out what the balance is here. But I'll also say it does go back to a lot of sort of education of understanding. So why is that, right? Why are they doing this, and why can't they end the grants at 2 years or 6 years?
So the reason I'm speaking to this is a lot of this stuff is based off of data and data analysis and all of that kind of stuff. That can be skewed, and there's a lot of subjectivity with things, which I know with class the reliability factors, we test into that to make sure you're a certified class observer. However, I've also met people that are like, well, if I score these teachers higher, class scores will be high, and there you go. So yes, you have that reliability factor, you're fine, like you know that you're a certified observer, but then you have people that are like, well, if I just score these people higher, our class scores will be higher. So then you have to like maintain these people and be like, you can't do that because that's going to cause conflict, it's going to skew the data, and cause all of this, and you throw. So we talked about it where we have one agency that gets thrown into DRS because of their class scores, and then the other one isn't, but it's factors. So how are agencies dealing with subjectivity and data analysis where you have one person that analyzes data one way, one person that analyzes it the other, gets two separate answers, and it causes
That's a design flaw, right? So I think what you're saying is that agencies have class observers who they employ, and their operations are specifically targeting professional development internally. And then Head Start contracts with outside observers. And if the internal folks are rating the interactions generously, then I agree, that is a big problem, which is why reliability is so important. And we encourage that every program know very, very intimately what those scores mean, how to get those scores accurately, and then how to provide feedback, because that's the worst case situation where programs think they're exceptionally high in their interactions, and then the third party comes in and provide the reliable assessment, and there's a big gap there. So that's kind of the key of reliability, and making sure that on both ends we have mechanisms in place and processes to make sure that individuals are reliable.
I think some of the complexity of this process is that not the tool, the class, because I do believe that it does provide that feedback to teachers, promotes ongoing quality. However, in Head Start across the nation, I think everyone has a problem with teacher turnover.
Yes.
Because we cannot compete.
Absolutely.
Some are part of school districts in the wage is fair, and some are not. And so the difficulty is that we do have some very high quality programs that do have teaching staff to leave.
Yeah.
And then you come in and you get a class score on a 6-month first-time teacher, that brings your whole program down. So that seems inequitable. I think that's where I hear a lot of programs talk about, it's just not equitable when you look at that level of disparity between, a 5-year teacher to a 6-month teacher. Because they're being graded the same, expected to be the same level, especially if they come in at the middle of the school year, because that does happen. So I think that's where programs struggle understanding it and embracing it, but not that it's a bad system, it's how it's applied.
Right, and
That's the problem.
very important
Yeah,
feedback.
it kind of relates back a little bit to the stigma point for me, because it seems like what you want to try to do is, there are certain things that if you don't perform well, there should be a stigma, I think. And so this is again back to a measurement issue. I think if you're not doing well on the class, there are reasons for that are about teacher turnover. And so is it, can we think about a system where you're designing like a 2-tier system where there's a probationary period that you can remediate this or something? So again, this is sort of where we all need to come together and speak with one voice about what we want, and because I think there's a strong rationale for that. The data kind of pans that out. So and then you worry a little less about the stigma, because then in those cases where you're actually getting thrown into competition, you really deserve it, and so you should feel good about
And
it.
people leave programs because they're fearful for their jobs.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, this is happening. And again, it can be a very good program. Or it could be, the way the original DRS, because I worked in a program on the very first round, and that was the most difficult time of my life. And the stress that brings to you and families, and then you begin to think, gosh, is this all even worth it? Does anyone, does Congress on down even appreciate what people give up to try to raise other people?
And I think that, I'll just add that I think for me, like going through the process, being out now, right, it is sort of time for us to not attack those individual triggers, but think about so what are the systemic pieces that are impacting us, right? So whatever the triggers are, there are always going to be issues with the triggers. So it's time for us to really start to think about the system. So what are our systems? We've been hearing teacher development and teacher pay for 50 years. It's 50 years later, we're still talking about it? Can we please fix this? So I think it's time to think about the big, you can keep attacking the individual triggers all you want. I'm gonna be honest. You can keep attacking those, you're not gonna get anywhere.
But we can assess them and evaluate
Some of those
them.
we can,
We
right?
can. Well, they should be measurable too.
Exactly. Well, I'm saying these
reverse,
triggers,
yes,
right? If we just keep
absolutely.
attacking these triggers, we're never going to get to the root of what our issues are, which are these bigger systems around
Absolutely.
governance and monitoring and teacher development and teacher pay. These bigger systems, we got to figure those out.
Because they directly relate back to one of those triggers.
Exactly. Yes.
I'll say for me that I love class, and I love a classroom that's really performing well in class, because it's such a warm, inviting, wonderful place to be. My struggle is creating that same atmosphere for our employees, where if you can't perform on class, you may lose your job. Because in our program, it's a part of our handbook that, if you don't have the right class score, we train you, coach you, we test again, and then you have to go away because we have to have somebody here to do that. So it seems like there's a little bit of dissonance there.
Well, and there's another concern too, that as everyone, and we all know, class is a wonderful tool. I think it does measure the things it's supposed to measure, and I think we all would agree that it's a great tool. But at what point does everyone's scores get higher? And they are, we got the national numbers.
Which is good.
Good.
It has.
Fabulous. But when does it get to the point where even the very best programs are having to recompete? Isn't there a threshold?
Right.
That's not the point of the design. That's not the
It's not, but
design,
it's
right?
not.
That's the way it's written, though.
Right, which is why I think Jeff earlier was saying this is our opportunity now. Because
So this is the place, right? As you're thinking about, this is a reauthorization issue. Let's be really honest, guys. Nobody's gonna open 1307. I would be, if it opens, I would be the first one that's, I don't know. I'll have to move. But I don't foresee anyone opening 1307, right? So you need to be really clear about thinking about, in the next reauthorization, how do we deal with this? And it's not just the specific trigger, right? So it's not just I don't like that there's the 10%. Nobody really likes it. But what's the bigger systemic issue that's going to impact that piece?
There's I think, a threshold or something like that. Because clearly there's a difference between high-performing, good-quality program and a classroom and not.
Absolutely.
But if you're scoring 6s and 7s and still recompeting, to me, systemically,
I don't think you recompete if you get a 6 or a 7, right?
Not today. Not today.
But again, I like ending on a psychometric issue. Are you measuring what you're intending to measure when you have those sorts of scenarios? The answer is no, right? So we have to fix this.
Yes.
Yeah.
So is Jen.
Well, so I'll get right to that. Thank you. So thank you all for joining us. I do want to put in one plug for Interact. Teachstone is putting on a conference in Chicago attached to the Chicago Regional on April 11th and 12th. And this will be one conversation we'll continue on there. There will be many others from just every situation you can think of in using the class: implementation, the use of data, professional supports. So I invite you all to join us in Chicago. Also, you can find out more information on our website on that conference. And stay in touch with us. We truly enjoy and appreciate you all being here and spending so much time with us. And enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.